As many of you know, I am a former Mormon, or as I like to say, a foreman. And while I left the church nearly 24 years ago, I've tried very hard to keep my ear to the grindstone in case there are any interesting developments. But boy, did I miss this one. 4 years ago, I produced a video called Mormonism is Racism, in which I talked about the racist foundations of the Mormon Church and how their founding document, the Book of Mormon, made absolutely no sense without the idea that black skin is a curse from God. Well, shortly thereafter, the church published a paper regarding one of its other racist doctrines, denying black men, and only African black men, the right to hold the Mormon priesthood. And I completely missed it. Shame on me. Although still far more shame on them. Prior to the church lifting the ban in 1978, only black men of African descent were denied the priesthood. The justification for this was kind of all over the place. Some said that black skin was the mark of Cain, a punishment from God. And the Book of Mormon backed up that idea by claiming that the Native Americans were dark-skinned because God had cursed them as well with a skin of blackness. The other justification takes us a little deeper into Mormon theology. Mormons believe that we all lived with God and his many wives prior to our coming to earth. And at some point, two plans were offered for the journey here to this wonderful planet. Jesus offered to die for our sins so that we could all have free will, while Lucifer wanted to deny us all free will so that no soul would be lost. After which a great war in heaven ensued. 1/3, we're told, fought with Jesus. 1/3 fought with Lucifer, and another third pretended to be Swiss, remaining neutral. The highly sought-after undecided voters, if you will. Some Mormon leaders argued that the people who had been cursed here on earth with the mark of Cain, black skin, belonged to this neutral contingent who stood on the sidelines while their brethren and sisterin fought it out. Black skin was again believed, or at least argued, to be a punishment from God. That all changed 3 years ago with the publication of this paper titled Race and the Priesthood, which states unequivocally that the church disavows the theories advanced in the past that black skin is a sign of divine disfavor or curse, or that it reflects unrighteous actions in a premortal life, that mixed-race marriages are a sin, or that blacks or people of any other race or ethnicity are inferior in any way to anyone else. In other words, that policy which discriminated against African American men and African men all over the world for more than 150 years was nothing but pure racist bullshit. Thanks, Brigham Young, you kooky, crazy prophet of God, you. What a nut. But within this paper, there are some real gems that should tip off any thinking person regarding Mormonism's claim of being led prophetically by the Lord himself. The paper says that church leaders believed that a revelation from God was needed to alter the policy. They believed? They believed? They didn't know? They didn't just ask the Lord, hey, Lord, do we need a revelation from you to change this horrible policy? Or can we just use our own sense of moral decency when there's something like this that is so incredibly repugnant and offensive? Oh, and by the way, are those Birkenstocks? I mean, isn't that the point of having a prophet? Or is Jesus just the world's shittiest leader ever, leaving everything unclear and up in the air? Here's another gem. After praying for guidance, President McKay, an earlier prophet, did not feel impressed to lift the ban. So the prophet went to the Lord, and the Lord said, look, I understand how horribly racist this policy is, but I didn't institute it. So despite the fact that it makes my church look like it's full of a bunch of wicked racist asshats, I'm going to let it go a little longer. That Jesus, he's just like Brigham. They're nutty, they're kooky, they're crazy. And finally, this one is my favorite. After spending many hours in the upper room of the Salt Lake Temple supplicating the Lord for divine guidance, the Lord apparently cried uncle. So after 150 plus years of this doctrinally unwarranted, unjustified, wicked, racist policy, the Lord didn't go to his prophet and say, hey, you guys gotta knock this shit off. No, he had to be persuaded by supplication. And by a bunch of white guys. Isn't it amazing how frequently this all-knowing, all-loving super being is behind the curve on the great moral issues of our time, 24 years after Brown versus Board of Education, and 11 years after Loving, the Lord was still completely clueless. Is there any being in existence more consistently guilty of leading from behind? Obama can't touch this Lord guy. Now, I feel bad saying this, and I'm going to look like a bit of a dick for doing so. Sorry, Phil. But if anyone watching this still thinks the Mormon Church is led by a living, sometimes breathing prophet who speaks regularly with the Lord, you need some serious help. There is no religion on earth so obviously, demonstrably full of shit than Mormonism. From its claims regarding the Native Americans being Hebrews who supposedly created vast Middle Age civilizations, claims disproved by DNA and reams of archaeological data, to this horribly racist policy which endured for over a century and a half. Joe and Brigham and everyone in between got virtually everything wrong. The only theological justification for Mormonism's existence is its claim to be led by the Lord himself through a living prophet. If you can believe that the Lord just sat back and watched African American men and black men all over the world suffer through these most trying times, never once speaking up through his prophet or offering any kind of moral leadership, I just have to wonder, what in heaven's name makes you think this being and this church are in any way deserving of your respect and devotion? And what in the world makes you think that these men are in any way connected to a morally transcendent being? Because while this policy was changed back in 1978, it took yet another 35 years for them to clarify that the original policy was nothing but sheer unadulterated racism. Over the years, Mormon prophets and apostles talked about blacks being inferior, or people in biracial relationships mixing their seed needed to be killed on the spot, and apparently with no theological justification whatsoever. And the Lord just let them do it, right? I truly don't understand how anyone can believe such things. It mystifies me beyond belief. Pun intended. Now, with that one out of the way, I think it's time we turn our attention elsewhere. Because while we're all still horrified and outraged at the thought of a church denying black men the right to hold the priesthood and be allowed leadership positions, no one seems equally horrified or outraged at the thought of women being denied that same opportunity or blessing. And this time, I'm not just talking about the Mormons. Yeah, I'm looking at you, Pope Frankie. Aren't you supposed to have the ear of the Lord as well? Is the Lord still horribly sexist and misogynist as ever? I mean, how can you justify denying women the right to hold the priesthood and serve in the leadership of the church when this country has finally put a woman in the I wrote this probably 3 weeks ago. Okay, so never mind.